live from Zug in Switzerland. My name is Jeff Eminis, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vertis Aviation. Having been in the industry for over 20 years, I'm the avid wine drinker and collector in our group, and it is my pleasure to be moderating today's webinar. I'm very pleased to have so many of different visitors joining us today, including customers and peers from locations around the world, such as South Africa, the USA, India, Ethiopia, and Russia, to name but a few. The session is expected to last for approximately 45 minutes, and we'll endeavor to stay on time. You will see the Q&A icon, which is where you can ask the panelists questions, and we will answer those towards the end of the session. We'll also be polling a question to you during the course of the webinar, so please keep an eye out for that. Kindly note that your microphones and webcams are disabled, as this is a webinar only. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the frontline staff and carers who are fighting to keep us all safe during these unprecedented times. So, our topic today is, can I fly during the pandemic, and what happens afterwards? Our first panelist is our chairman and co-founder, Julian Burrell. Julian has spent 22 years in business aviation and holds a master's degree in air transport management from Cranfield University. Julian enjoys the great outdoors, and in particular skiing in the Swiss Alps. Next up is Catherine Buchanan, who joins us from Dubai. Catherine is our Chief Operating Officer and has been in business aviation for over 14 years. In her spare time, Catherine enjoys studying and is currently undertaking a master's degree in practical science communication at Cambridge University. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Julian, who will take us through a general overview with regards to the airlines and cargo markets. And Julian, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who have joined us from around the world. Great to have you with us. Yes, in my part, I'd like to talk to you about the commercial aviation sector. I mean, as I'm sure you are well aware, this has been very, very heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been a great amount of reduction in capacity. A lot of aircraft have been grounded and parked up. But let me talk about some of the more interesting things that have been happening in the last few weeks. There are a couple of things. Repatriation flights, there have been a lot of those going on. And of course, there's been a lot of cargo flights going on. So I'll just go through those first of all. So on the repatriation side, what we've seen is that a lot of people have been stranded abroad. They were on holiday, they were on business trips, and a lot of airlines just were reducing their capacity. There weren't the available connections to get people home. So a number of nations have chartered aircraft to get citizens back home. And so what we've seen is a number of very unusual flights happening in terms of the routes and in terms of the length of flights. So, so if I just introduce a couple of those examples, if you look now on your screen, you can see a picture there of Austrian Airlines. And they, for instance, on the 28th of March, operated their longest ever flight from Vienna down to Sydney non-stop. And they flew 17 hours on their Boeing 777. And they went there to repatriate 300 of their Austrian citizens. And then only a few days earlier, on the 25th of March, Vamos Airlines, Spanish carrier, was engaged to operate their Boeing 747 to fly from Honolulu on Hawaii back to Frankfurt, which was a whole 15-hour flight. And that was an interesting one because they carried 400 EU nationals that had been on one of the cruise liners that was circling around the Pacific at this time, because none of the islands were allowing them to dock. And finally, Hawaii allowed them to come in. So this is when Vamos Airlines was sent out to bring them back to Europe. Another example is last Wednesday. So Virgin Australia flew their Boeing 777 from Paris all the way to Sydney non-stop. which was just shy of 20 hours, 19 hours and 45 minutes. And they had been chartered by the French government to repatriate French citizens from Australia and New Zealand. And they were flying back empty. So they managed to fly back empty because they were a lot lighter, of course, and they only landed on 6 tons of fuel. So they did very well there. Very sadly, of course, we hear today that Virgin Australia has gone into administration. So we really wish them well. We hope that something can be sorted out so that that airline can be brought back to the market to create more competition in Australia. So that's about the repatriation flights. Now, cargo. There's been a lot of cargo flights going on because, of course, a lot of nations have now need a lot of equipment. So a lot of PPE, as in personal protection equipment, a lot of ventilators, a lot of ethanol, and typically a lot of this is now coming from China. And if you think that passenger aircraft account for around 30% of all cargo space that is flying around the skies, now that a lot of passenger airlines have reduced their capacity, a lot of this cargo space isn't available anymore. So it's put a lot of pressure on the existing cargo carriers to pick up the slack. And they just haven't been able to cope. So now what's happening is a number of airlines have had to think out the box and have had to adapt. And so what's happening is, as you can see on one of the pictures there, airlines are filling their cabins, not with passengers, but with cargo. So you've had aircraft flying empty to China and filling not only their holds, but also their passenger cabins with cargo. And you see another picture there of TAP Airlines of Portugal. They recently flew their brand new Airbus A330-900 from China back to Lisbon with 15 tons of equipment, filling their holds, filling the passenger cabins. And that incidentally was also one of the longest flights they've ever operated, which was just shy of 15 hours. You had other airlines such as Aegean Airlines. You can see a picture there in the middle. They took 2 of their aircraft, an A320 and A321. They took out all of the seats to create more space for cargo to be flown. And they've done 20 rotations to China and back, bringing much needed medical equipment back to Egypt. Now, one announcement I would like to make is that Vertis Aviation has just literally yesterday signed an exclusive marketing agreement to market an Embraer 145LR. So it's a 49-seat regional aircraft. We will be marketing that aircraft for charter. It is based in Malabo, which is in Equatorial Guinea in Africa, and is going to be, or is on the Ethiopian register on an AOC in Ethiopia. It's fully available for passenger as well as cargo charter. So if there's any need out there, please contact us and we'd be very happy to quote on that aircraft. So that's cargo. So now I want to analyze some of the data about the reduction in the number of passenger airlines flying and the amount of or the reduction in capacity overall. So if we go to the graph, Jeff. So if we look at the graph here, we're looking at the top graph, and what you can see here are the movements, so the departures from the US to Europe in the month of March for 2019 and 2020. And the top line, the gray line, is for 2019. And you can see the pink line is 2020. And if we just look at the 31st of March for the 2 years, you can see that on that particular day in 2019, there were 420 departures from the US to Europe. And in this year, so only a few days ago, there were only 42 departures on that particular day. So I think this graph really epitomizes what is going on now in terms of the reduction in overall capacity on the commercial aviation side overall. Other statistics that I can mention to you is that around 15,000 commercial aircraft are now grounded and parked up. You've got 50% of all narrow body aircraft parked up, and around 70% of all wide body long-haul aircraft are now also parked up. And if we look at some of the airlines, some of the examples here, one is, for instance, Cathay Pacific, that typically flies to most parts of the world. They are now only operating 4 long-haul destinations a week, only 4. Emirates Airlines isn't even flying at all. They've grounded their whole fleet until early May. American Airlines has got the largest fleet in the world. They are reducing their domestic flying by a whole 80% in May. So currently it's 60% down, and they are talking about reducing down to 80% in May. And then other airlines you've heard of, I'm sure, EasyJet and Ryanair have grounded their whole fleets probably until May. And then yesterday, Swiss International Airlines announced that in this summer, they don't anticipate operating any more than 20% of their previous capacity. So that's a huge reduction. And I think that reflects what is potentially going to be happening in the market, certainly this year. So what does this mean in the short to medium term? Well, I think once demand starts to come back, once the borders start to open and people are able to fly, and once this demand starts to increase, there's going to be a logistical challenge, certainly, to return aircraft back into service. And all this will take a lot of time. So you've got pilots who potentially are out of check. They haven't flown for quite some time, so they'll have to go and have simulator training. You've got aircraft that have been parked up for many weeks. Some of them may have to go into maintenance. So it's going to take time to get them through maintenance and then up and running again. So again, airlines are going to be reintroducing their services slowly. There's going to be less routes available. And also, potentially, what's going to happen, airlines are talking about spacing passengers between in the cabin. So a lot is saying that the middle seat of each row will be kept free. So overall, this will mean there'll be less capacity available per aircraft that will fly around in the sky. And I would have thought that flying will potentially become more expensive because of this in the short to medium term. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Kat, who's going to take you through business aviation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So I'm here to talk about the business aviation side and to analyze the data that's coming out of both WingX and Avinode. The bottom graph on this slide is showing us the historical activity, and it's of no surprise that it's tapered off since border restrictions were put into place. We saw a peak of traffic around mid-March, and that was really people rushing to get back to their family or a location that they wanted to be before formal border restrictions were put into place. So on the next slide, the data that we're currently looking at has been provided by Avinode. For those of you who aren't or are unaware of who this company is, you can consider them the Skyscanner of the private jet industry. They're the search engine for aviation professionals. So this data is comprised of all of the searches that individuals do on the platform. They've aggregated this data so that we can see the total level of activity through Q1 of 2020. As we can see, the searches on the platform were relatively steady and then peaked and started to drop off at the end of March. It's not a surprise to many of you, I'm sure. As I mentioned a minute ago, we saw upticks of activity between the 11th and the 25th of March, and I think we can safely attribute this to the border controls that were being put in place all over Europe and the USA. We started to see a sudden rush of traffic and movement in order for people to get back to where they wanted to be, whether that be home or elsewhere. In terms of the traffic out of Asia, there were a large proportion of repatriation flights between Europe and China specifically. This is something that Vertis Aviation was heavily involved in, and we repatriated a large number of people from various European countries back to Asia. I know this might look a bit bizarre that it's registering as an Asian departure, but due to coronavirus epidemic, many European operators were unwilling to fly to China and other Asian countries. So we found that we ended up primarily chartering Chinese operators. They flew to Europe without passengers, picked them up and flew home, which is why it would be registering as an Asian departure. In some instances, we weren't able to get these passengers back to China. This was after the border restrictions were put in place by the government. So we ended up chartering aircraft to Hong Kong, Macau, Cambodia, Thailand. Again, some of these aircraft came from the Asian region. So towards the end of March, we can see that the demand has tailed off, and this was down to the majority of countries having imposed border restrictions for passenger aircraft. And well, this is where we currently are now. So Jeff, if we can move to the next slide, please. So this graph that we're looking at now is again generated from Avinode data. This is now looking into the future demand. The dotted lines are showing cumulative demand for each month from last year, and the solid lines are showing the comparative demand for this year. It's not an entirely surprising picture again. We did see some demand in April, which was around 27% of last year's. I think those of us who are receiving inquiries in the industry would attribute that to the inquiries that we're still receiving to this day from people who are stuck in a location that they want to get back to, they want to get back to family or to a particular place, whether or not we can do that at the moment. So just an example, the UAE has taken a harsher tone with the border restrictions, and they've put in measures to prohibit even the return of residents. So this has meant that there are a number of people displaced around the world, and we're still receiving inquiries from those people. They're desperate to get back. Looking forward to May, June and July, the demand is looking pretty flat. I don't see this as an indicator of what the year has in store for business aviation. I see it more as an indicator of how long the border restrictions are expected to last. I think most estimates are around June and July, and we'll start seeing restrictions being lifted then. In terms of what that means for the future, and taking into consideration what Julian has spoken about with the anticipated reduction in commercial airline routes and traffic and capacity, we are expecting a large uptick in business aviation travel, most probably in July, August, September, once border restrictions are lifted. At the end of the day, people are going to need to travel. I know there's a lot of discussion around whether people are going to change their behavior going forward. Are we going to be doing more business over Zoom? And yeah, I think there is some truth to that. But at the same time, some business can only be done in person. So for some people, travel is mandatory. There are those people, I'm just going to give an example, who operate factories in the middle of nowhere. They're going to need to get to them. And with reduced airline capacity and potentially removed routes, people are naturally going to require private aviation. So this seems to lead us to the belief that the uptick in business will really be around the air taxi or light executive jet segment. It's smaller aircraft that are typically going to fly on routes for between 1 and 4 hours. This traffic is probably going to be demanded by a relatively new demographic that are going to be introduced to aircraft charter through necessity. I would hazard a guess that these people are currently flying or were currently flying in premium classes on scheduled airlines. Another thing that I think we need to be mindful of is the fact that aircraft owners, including some of our own actually, aren't willing to charter their aircraft out at the moment. They want to keep their aircraft for the family use only due to the risk perception, but also because they want guaranteed availability for themselves. And I think this will have a knock-on effect to us, as it's going to limit availability on the market, and we're going to see a reduced capacity. I think we also need to consider the change in perception towards personal safety and risk. Some people are going to be concerned about their increased risk of infection using airlines. They're going to want the assurance of reduced risk. They want to know that their aircraft has been disinfected, has been sanitized properly before their use. And I think as an industry, it's something that we've done really well. We've managed to get across to the public that during this crisis, hygiene is and has been paramount and will continue to be. So to compound this forecast, I would have to mention that we've seen a huge rise in block hour charter program requests from our existing customers. People know that they're going to need to fly. They're fully aware that there's going to be capacity and availability issues going forward, and they want guaranteed availability. Looking into the future, I think it's imperative to bear in mind that when we come out of the lockdown or when border restrictions are relaxed, things may not go back to normal in terms of regulations, restrictions, policies, legislation. We saw from managing charter flights during the pandemic that the situation was very fluid. Whether it be the fact that regulations changed after contracts were signed and flights were subsequently confirmed. To give an example here, after booking a flight to Hong Kong, the country mandated a minimum 14-day quarantine, which our passengers didn't have the right to do. So we had to quickly think on our feet and find another destination that matched up with commercial flights. Another example of the fluidity that we're facing at the moment is documentation that countries are asking for. We had a flight to Cyprus, and 5 hours before departure, the regulation was changed and they mandated that all passengers needed a medical certificate to clear them to enter the country. So while I think these kind of situations won't be so severe, I think it's important to bear in mind that they can certainly happen. I think it's there is a possibility of there being a second wave of COVID, and we need to bear in mind that there may be another round of border restrictions as well. Maybe not so severe, hopefully not so severe, but the possibility is definitely still there. So to summarize my long-winded monologue here, it's not all doom and gloom. There is going to be travel in the future. How that will look is somewhat conjecture. I don't have a crystal ball as much as I wish I did, but what we've presented today has been based on historical data, data based on underlying inquiries that one of the largest aircraft search engine platforms is receiving, based on the actual inquiries that we are currently receiving ourselves and our own experience. And I hope that's been somewhat informative. So I'm going to hand you back to our host, Mr. Eminis.
Thank you, Catherine. That was very good and detailed, and Julian as well. Thank you. I'm going to quickly pop the poll out now, so we can fill that in before we go into the Q&A. And I've got some questions myself that I would like to ask. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. And while we ask that, take your time, please fill that in, and I'll share the results after. Catherine, so just looking back now on you mentioned there's sort of different types of paperwork. I know we've had some flights, even including one today, that required sort of specialist papers and conditions and so forth. There was a very small flight from, I believe, Athens to Zagreb in Croatia. Perhaps you could enlighten us about what kind of paperwork our customers can expect to have to provide in some form of detail, perhaps the routine with the crew, etc.
Well, it's difficult to be definitive on the kind of paperwork that we're going to require. The reason being, as I was saying, it's an incredibly fluid situation and it's changing on, I would like to say a daily basis, but sometimes it's an hourly basis. I mean, for example, the flight that we did today from Athens to Zagreb, they were asking for copies of residency visas, they were asking for medical certificates, they were asking for sponsorship letters. You know, this is a European flight where all we have to normally do is show a passport. So we just have to be mindful that we may have to be on the back foot a little bit and be prepared to go and get unexpected paperwork. In terms of crew restrictions, I think we need to be mindful of quarantine, mandated quarantine in certain countries. On the smaller aircraft, it's not so much of an issue when we can do immediate turnarounds and go back to home base. On longer haul flights, what we found, especially if we can only fly with a single crew, is that we're typically having to think outside the box and organize the flight so that if the country that we're going to is mandating a 14-day quarantine, we ensure that our crew don't clear customs. We then immediately turn the aircraft around and go to a neighboring country where we can clear customs, crew rest without the concerns of quarantine. On other flights where we're able to double crew, we'll have one crew flying the aircraft down and then one crew flying the aircraft back. And that way we can keep an element of flexibility.
Okay, thank you. And Julian, one of the questions for you on the airline side, obviously we've repatriated a number of people as well on using 787s and so forth. What kind of restrictions are you finding, or not restrictions, but sort of additional paperwork? Was it quite similar? How many crew were flying on the aircraft? Any issues with cargo and things like that? Oh, you're muted, Julian.
Apologies.
There we
Can you
are.
hear me now?
Got you. Yes.
So yes, I mean we operated a very large repatriation flight out of Africa recently, so we have some experience there. It took a lot of planning. It really took a lot of planning. I think we had to plan it. It took at least, I think it was 10 days in the planning. A number of airlines wouldn't even consider it. We finally found a Spanish carrier that were extremely helpful. And they had to heavy crew it because they had to operate from the Canary Islands to the country where we were pick them up and basically turn around and leave again, because that country wasn't allowing any of the crew to, again, clear customs, stay overnight and so on, which is normally what an airline would do. So they had 2 sets of crew on board and did exactly what Kat was mentioning. They picked up the passengers and left again. And it was a big crew day, but it was the only way that it was possible. Now, these passengers were Spanish citizens, and we were repatriating them back to mainland Europe, to Spain. So in terms of paperwork, in this particular instance, they didn't have to provide any additional paperwork. When it comes to I think was your question what additional paperwork may be required in the future?
Sure, and were there any sort of particular restrictions in that sense, which I think you've covered? But
yeah, I think it's
diplomatic. Was it embassy to embassy that had to get involved?
Yes,
yes. So it's not just the process. What I'm trying to ascertain for our customers here is timeline. You know, where a simple flight would normally be an Athens to Zagreb like today. You'd get the permit in a few minutes and we'd be done. This process took us 5 days, and on what is happening now, with your flights, to manage expectations.
Absolutely. I mean, it is taking a lot longer. So, I mean, just to give you another example, this is more on the private jet side, but we do operate quite a lot in the Middle East as well, and we've had so many requests from our customers to fly back to Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia was one of the first countries to totally close to any flying. I mean, even domestic flying isn't allowed. And the passengers were all saying, yeah, we can help and get the permit. We can get it through the embassy and so on. But none of them have managed to do so. You would really have to be extremely high up, I think, in the royal family to be able to fly back to Saudi Arabia. So it is dependent on the country where you're flying to, of course, but you need to be able to have connections. Or again, it's as Jeff was saying, with the repatriation flight out of Africa, it was the embassies, the local embassies in the country the Spanish embassy who were liaising with the local authorities to really make that happen. So in short, it takes much longer to get these flights organized, for sure.
To get it done. So basically, we can say business aviation has become an essential service now, opposed to when there have been other sort of economic events. We're the first ones to go, but I think we'll be able to help in our industry in particular get things moving and help keep people in jobs. So I've got the results of the poll here, which I will just share with everybody. And it was quite neck on neck, but people think they'll actually travel a little less, but only 2%. So not too much. Julian, on a slightly lighter note, just before we go over to some Q&A, there are sort of 2 or 3 questions that are bubbling away here. In terms of the cargo, what has been sort of some of the more interesting requests and flights and so forth?
Wow, I mean, we typically don't do a lot of cargo flying. We have some flying throughout the year, but it's not something that we specialize in. However, we have helped some of our clients government clients, and in particular fly things like, as I was mentioning, medical equipment, so PPE, ventilators, ethanol, and so on, out of China back to those countries. But we recently received a request to fly 600 sheep down to the Middle East, down to Saudi Arabia, which is rather unusual, and that obviously has to do with with Ramadan and the festivities that will happen after Ramadan. So that was rather unusual for us, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So I wanted to now open up the floor as such. If anybody has any questions, there are two questions here which I'll ask and then just direct accordingly. So one of our customers is asking, would you please advise in terms of paperwork and medical certificates in particular, are the airlines helping to get those in the case of very short notice? If I could perhaps direct that to you, Catherine.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what Vertis is doing, we will certainly help wherever possible. With regards to that particular Cyprus flight, we just to set the scene, if I can, the passengers were actually sat on board the aircraft when the NOTAM came in. We actually worked with the handler and managed to get the decision overturned. So we will always work with our clients to make sure that any of these kind of last minute demands can be met. Obviously, there's only so much we can do, especially when we're talking about paperwork that's required by authorities, but we will certainly do our very best to help.
Okay, thank you. And there's one question here that I could almost put into two here. So what has happened to charter rates recently? As an example, maybe use real rates being paid today for Falcon 7X or G550, so direct operating costs. And are there any regional differences in rates? And that ties in with another attendee that is asking, are charter rates rising? Perhaps Julian, would you like to field this one?
Sure. What I've seen actually is that charter rates are going up. You've got not all the operators. I'm talking more about the private jet side now. Not all the operators are flying, as Kat was mentioning earlier. So that leaves less operators in the market who will consider flying currently. But also because there's less flying around, they're not able to match up certain flights. So typically you've got some operators who will quote maybe point-to-point flying, and then they can match up other flights once they arrive somewhere. And so they tend to be a little less expensive in the market. But I've noticed, I was only looking at the requirement yesterday to fly to the Middle East. I noticed that this particular operator was considerably more expensive than they would have been 6 months ago. So it certainly showed to me, illustrated to me that the cost of flying has gone up. Now, of course, you have to take into account now that they can't necessarily night stop, as we were saying, in certain countries. So they're having to maybe fly even further to get somewhere where they can night stop. Or, as Kat was saying, they double crew the flight. So they'll go from London to, I don't know where, Saudi, if they were allowed in, leave the passengers and then come straight back to Europe, and they'll double crew it. So the whole operation is potentially a bit more expensive, and hence the hourly rates and the charter prices are currently higher than they have been.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Catherine, one for you here is, do you see any possibility of the UAE opening up for private jets for foreign residents to return anytime soon?
So this is quite a tough one, because this is pure and utter conjecture, really. This is me taking a guess on what the government is going to do. So from what I am seeing, there is a helpline at the minute that the government has opened to try and help get people who are official residents back to the country. There is a whole application process. I'm currently working with a client at the moment who she's the PA to a CEO of a major bank here. Her CEO is here. His family is in the UK. They're currently undertaking the application. They've had to submit a huge number of forms. We're about 14 days into the application now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's taking time because there are so many people displaced, but it's looking likely that they will get the permissions soon, hopefully within the next week or two. And yes, then we will be able to get the permissions for them to fly back. Permissions are typically taking between 4 and 5 days for aircraft to arrive in the UAE.
Once you have the permit from
The
sort of foreign office and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and that just ties in with just, it was more of a statement here than a question, but an attendee's just written, Emirates has just further cancelled all bookings that were for May and June to the 1st of July. So that's going to certainly compound what you were mentioning. Have either of you seen any uptick in aircraft acquisition inquiries, or has it mainly been block hours, or is any of that had sort of more inquiries or not?
I would say it's mainly been block hour charter inquiries. We've had quite a few of those actually. Typically for light to mid-sized jets, people are looking to be able to get 50 to 100 block hours. I can feel that people are really worried about aircraft availability, so they're wanting to get that in the bag as quick as possible. And
Julian, you agree on that point?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, we've still got some customers who call us weekly. I mean, we've got one particular customer who who travels very regularly between the UK and Switzerland, and he's desperate to get back to Switzerland, but he's not a Swiss national. He doesn't have residency in Switzerland, so he's not eligible to actually enter Switzerland, and he's desperate to get back. So I mean, there is certainly demand for those types of flights, but at the moment he's not allowed to enter the border.
Okay, and one other quite an interesting point here: how are operators going to instill confidence that their aircraft are properly prepared for flights in terms of hygiene, catering, and other services? Do you have a sense of this?
I think the general aviation sector has done a lot. I mentioned this in the presentation. They've done a lot in terms of PR on this point. We've seen a lot of pictures of crew wearing masks and wearing gloves. We've seen a lot of TikToks and Instagrams of aircraft being disinfected. It's a very modern way of communicating now. So I think that people do have confidence that the aircraft are being properly sanitized, they are being properly disinfected, and that there are a huge number of precautions. I know some operators are even asking that the passengers wear a mask and gloves during flight to protect their crew as well. You know, we always talk about frontline staff or frontline people being nurses and doctors, and of course I'm not disputing that. Of course they really are, and they're doing an absolutely incredible job, but we have to also think of the other people that are putting themselves in the front line of this, and it is people in the grocery stores, it is people like our crew who are putting themselves at risk every time they do a flight. So yes, I think that there are a number of precautions being put in place, and I think that passengers are seeing that when they get on board, and they're seeing it beforehand in corporate communications.
Thank you. One of the questions that was just sort of came out now from an attendee was any support coming from the EBAA, so that's the European Business Aviation Association, for those that do not know. And I'd like to field this one myself. I have been following this, quite religiously, and I join a lot of similar webinars and Zoom chats and all kinds of sort of information. Looking to find out when things are going to move, and I've been on a few of the calls where EBAA, Rob has been on, and they're doing, I believe, very good work trying to harmonize a situation where, whilst we have the European Union, each country is still protecting its own citizens, its own borders, have different rules and regulations in terms of when they're going to open up. As an example, in Switzerland on the 27th of April, where we are seeing that hairdressers are going to reopen and so forth. And then the 11th of May, schools will reopen. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we are also being told here that our borders won't open to foreign nationals and so forth until the very earliest, the end of June. And I think that's compounded as well by, if you look at what's happened in the US today with the announcement that immigration will be suspended as well. So the European Business Aviation Association, I believe, are doing and lobbying as much as they can with the authorities to assist in terms of, getting dispensations for crew that are perhaps running out of license, or, their licenses coming up for renewal, or simulator sessions, helping them get dispensation for when they need to do longer flights, when you do need to repatriate people, and they're being a little bit more flexible. So I believe they're doing a good job given the very difficult circumstances surrounding each country and their rules. So I'm just going to get going through here. Catherine, perhaps one for you. We're just on our last 3 minutes. Out of your 10 requests, how many are really valid and doable?
Oh, question. We've seen a real difference in the type of requests we're getting. So yes, some of them have been cargo. So I'd probably say out of the last 10 requests we've had, 6 of those have been cargo. All of them were doable. We're currently working on a couple of other passenger ones that are repatriation flights that are doable because the government is involved. And we've also been asked to move some animals as well. Again, doable. I think there was only, out of the last 10, there's only been 1 that we've not really been able to do because of the border restrictions and immigration restrictions in place. So actually it's quite a good ratio.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. So a client here has asked us, are there any restrictions in terms of age of the passenger? The principal's daughter is currently in Europe. She's 8 years old, and once the schools are open, do you think there'll be a way for them to fly without a child, without a parent? Have we faced this now? Either of you, have we sort of had that sort of unaccompanied minor effectively traveling during this time? Have we come across any of those sort of requests?
I think it depends where she's flying to. I know I can see she's currently in Europe, but where she needs to get to, and we'd have to speak to the authorities on that to make sure. I can't see that it's impossible, but but we would have to triple check on that one.
Okay, thank you. And that's quite it would be, actually, believe it or not, going back to the UAE. So the UAE is a very, very interesting location for everybody to go to today. And this is a little bit left field, but is there any indication that the introduction of immunity passports are inevitable? And do you think it would be a help or hindrance? Julian, have you had any thoughts on immunity passports?
Gosh, that's a tough one. I mean,
it really segregates people, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know which way to answer this one. There has obviously been debate about this. People are looking into it. Will it make travel easier? I don't know. Honestly, there has just been a lot of chat about it, but I think it'll take a lot more time, analysis, debate to see whether it makes sense to really introduce this. That's all I can say for now, to be honest.
Fair enough. So we are just basically coming to the end of our time, and we appreciate everybody's very busy doing other bits and pieces trying to save the world. So we don't want to run over too long, and I think it's given a very broad view of where we are, as Catherine rightly said, and there is no crystal ball for us to know where to go and what to do, but we are here if you have any questions or so forth. I put the telephone numbers of all of our offices up on the screen for you as well, or you could email us. And once things get a little bit easier, or if you want us to have a price indication, you can download our app, which is on both the Google Play Store and the Apple iTunes Store, and you can go and have a look and get some price indications. Of course, bearing in mind that availability is going to be somewhat limited depending on where you're going and what you're doing. And from my side, I'd also like to close off with thanking Catherine and Julian for an excellent presentation. I've really enjoyed it. It's the first time we've done this. You know, we thank you all for joining us. So we look forward to seeing you perhaps on the next one. Stay safe, stay well, and take care. All the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.